What's up, dudes? I'm Boldags Hunter. Welcome back to episode 2 of Take Every Fight, Brawling on a Budget. In this series, I take a low-cost solo PvP fit into faction warfare space and fight literally anything I come across. I'll break down each fight, go over my decision-making, the tactics I used, what worked, and where I totally messed up and could have done better. Today's ship, the Arbitrator. Let's get into it. Today we're flying the Arbitrator, a flexible EWAR drone cruiser with a twist. Gets bonuses to weapon disruptors. It's got a lot of the same versatility as the Vexor, but it's that EWAR bonus that really sets it apart. Weapon disruptors are a seriously underrated module, vicious when used right, and trust me, I didn't always use them right, so I want to help you learn from my mistakes. Weapon disruptors don't stop your enemy from locking you like ECM and sensor dams do, they just make their weapons suck. Tracking disruptors cripple turret ships, and guidance disruptors hit missiles. Both can be scripted to double down on the tracking or range penalty. Our TDs should be very helpful, as most what we'll be fighting in faction warfare are turret ships. A tracking disruptor can wreck their range or make their guns track like they're mounted on a battleship. So here's the build I'm taking out today. The Tracking Disruptor Arbitrator. This thing is a straight brick fit with solid DPS while gutting some turret damage from the enemy. It's also way easier to fly than the Newt Vexor from the last episode. There's no active tank modules or Newt micromanagement to worry about, so you just gotta focus on applying damage and heating smart. So moving into the high slots, we've got a bit of a weird turret layout and no weapon bonuses, so I'm gonna be running 2 220mm autocannons and 2 rapid light missile launchers. You get selectable damage, no cap usage, and solid application. Rapid lights are easy on the power grid as well, which lets us fit that 1600mm plate without needing a power grid rig. Then into the mid slots, we've got another full brawler layout. We have a Tenement Afterburner, a Scram, and then I dropped the web after the first few fights. You'll probably lose range control without it, but I kept finding 2 and 3 versus 1s that second T would have really helped in. Then moving into the low slots, we're bricked up. 1600mm plate, damage control 2, energized multi-spec, 1 drone damage amp, and then I swapped the second drone damage amp I had originally for a reactive armor hardener, and that gets us to around 37 to 39,000 EHP, depending on what damage type is being shot at you, which really isn't that bad for a 50mm cruiser. Moving into the rigs, to keep costs low, we're running T1. Resists are already pretty good, so I went with 3 Trimark pumps to squeeze the most out of that plate. Then for the drones, we have 50 megabytes of bandwidth, which gives us 2 sets of mediums and 2 sets of lights. I like EWAR Mimitar drones. They're fast, good tracking, good damage types, but you can mix and match based on whatever you like. So let's get started with our first fight. I decided to try sitting in the Plex and have the fights find me. So you get to pick the starting range, but usually people only slide into you if they think they have the advantage. Now, I was pretty upset how I fumbled this one. I meant to Tracking Disrupt the Cat Navy and then focus the Thrasher, and I did the opposite of that. So the Cat Navy was able to put a ton of damage into me before I was able to get my Tracking Disruptor switched over to it. Unfortunately, by the time I was able to get the Tracking Disruptor swapped over, I was almost dead, but you can see the damage significantly slowed down once I got the TD onto the Cat Navy. So I was pretty sad about this one because I definitely feel like I could at least kill that Thrasher had I not messed up there at the beginning of this fight. So right off the bat, I was kind of regretting not having a second TD or that reactive armor hardener. Then rolling into our second fight here, I had a Caracal start off warping into me. So I started focusing him. Then he had a Thrasher and a Catalyst come in. In hindsight, I probably should have switched over to the Thrasher probably right away, because I was able to Tracking Disrupt the Catalyst and take actually all of his damage off of me. He didn't do any damage to me in this fight. So the Caracal has rapid lights, so he's got a really long reload timer once he gets his clip into me. The Catalyst got pretty much knocked out with a Tracking Disruptor, and the Thrasher was able to just kind of do steady damage into me the whole time. So he also had the least EHP, so I probably should have focused the Thrasher and then maybe tried taking out the Caracal. And then if I was still alive, clean up the Catalyst. But didn't quite work out that way. and I just wasn't able to get the Caracal down in time. So in this one, Uncle Weirdo tripped over his massive balls rushing to get into a fight with me, and I didn't get to start recording in time, but he took the fight. I don't know if this was the best idea for him, but he ADC'd there at the beginning, and he had dual reps, so he was actually repping a good amount of damage, but it just wasn't enough to counteract the light drones in pretty decent application, especially with the web. Then for this one, this was the first fight where I swapped over to dual Tracking Disruptors instead of the web, and I was flying in the wrong direction at the beginning of the fight and lost my scram, and this is just kind of showcasing when you don't have range control. It's very easy for them to be able to disengage and warp off. Then rolling into my next fight, I slid into a Thorax, Coercer Navy, and Algos. It was a little bit ambitious on my part. I probably should have had Tracking Disruptors scripts loaded, and I probably should have put both of them onto the Thorax, since he actually does more damage than probably the Coercer and Algos combined. The Algos is a soft target, but he's a little bit too far away for me to attack. So I decided to focus on the Coercer Navy, since he probably has less EHP than the Thorax, but they still have about 18,000 EHP. They're very tanky faction destroyer. So if I was able to mitigate more of the damage from the Thorax, I might have been able to take the Coercer out in time, but I did not. Then rolling into my next roam, I did have to respect this guy. Warped into me in a Tristan and tried to kite me, but he found out how fast warriors actually are. So he was trying to defang my drones there a little bit, but they were just eating him up a little bit too fast. So he decides to disengage and pull range, and I think he didn't realize that my drones were still on him. So even though he was out of my drone control range, my drones were still chasing him and were able to take him out. Then getting to this next fight, I had a Punisher slide into me. I did see that he had an Executor Navy issue that was also on scan, so I figured he was behind him. I probably shouldn't have wasted any ammo shooting this Punisher, as they're super tanky. I kind of thought I might be able to kill him before the Executor got there, but I was mistaken. Then I actually made a pretty big mistake here. I was kind of concerned about getting my Tracking Disruptors and getting tackle onto the Executor Navy to try and keep him kind of at range, and I end up putting about 10 extra missiles into the Punisher, and then made a massive mistake and didn't stop shooting the Punisher with my autocannons. So that was very costly. But I got both of the Tracking Disruptors on the Executor, and when he's out at 3,000 kilometers, he's not really hitting me at all, which is pretty nice. But the problem here is that he has a web and I don't, so he has range control and he's slowly closing the gap. So right here I tried to change direction and go back towards him to try and maybe hit, to get him to slingshot past me a little bit. It works a little bit briefly as I pull some range on him, but then he corrects and starts closing the gap again on me, slowly but surely. I did finally get my autocannons back onto the Executor Navy issue, but this is almost after a minute of just shooting the Punisher for no reason. Then they started trying to defang some of my drones. They got one of my Valks before I noticed. So I started managing my drones a little bit better, pulling that drone in whenever he starts doing damage to it to break the lock on it. But yeah, I probably made my second big mistake here by not switching over to tracking speed scripts once he closed that gap and got right on top of me, because the optimal range is not really helping me anymore. Then it's actually a pretty good example of how heat damage dissipates into other modules that are nearby them. I turned off the heat on my one tracking disruptor, but since it was between my afterburner and the other tracking disruptor, the heat damage actually bled through and burned out one of my TDs. So that actually hurt me a good bit here, as that damage probably was mitigating some of the damage on me. But at this point, I decided to do some manual piloting to try and get as tight of an orbit around the Excurier as I possibly could. And it actually did work here for a minute. I was able to kind of get under his guns since I was manually orbiting as close as I could to him. Then he kind of noticed and started flying away from me, and then he landed some good shots on me and took me down. So this one actually made me really sad, because if I wasn't shooting the Punisher at the beginning so long, I probably would have gotten the kill. But really good fight. Moving into our next fight, I actually warped to this Plex to fight the Thrasher fleet, Algos, and Coercer Navy, but ended up running into this Vigilant as I landed, and thought, why not? So the Vigilant initially kind of came in to do some damage on me. So I dropped both of my tracking disruptors on him, and this significantly shut down his damage. But you can just see how powerful those Vigilant webs are, and he's got me slowed down to almost nothing. Then he decides to disengage here and starts pulling range. He actually didn't have a scrammer point, so I probably should have left at this point. But I have the bad habit of not doing that, and as you can see, almost the entirety of Minotaur faction warfare starts showing up to dogpile in on this. So it was actually starting to not go very well for the Vigilant, but he had friends. Then rolling into our last fight, I've been sitting in this Plex for like 45 minutes and was trying to reverse engineer this Coercer Fit that I'd found in local, because he was like 12% over on CPU. I found it on Zkill, so I know he had it fit, and I could not figure out what he did to have this thing fit right. But it's a pretty nasty little Coercer Fit. Did eventually figure out what he had going on to make it fit, so if you can figure it out, let me know in the comments. But I didn't realize that a bunch of people were warping in on me, so this fight wasn't really going well for me between these four ships. I kind of decided to go with the Catalyst Navy first and try and get some damage off the field, but then they brought in a Scythe, so this just turned into a gank. It's actually probably one of the lamest things you can do in PvP, at least in a solo PvP. I understand in a fleet, but it's just a gank. Not fun. Not a good fight. But overall, I really like the Arbitrator. It's a pretty solid ship. I feel like it has a lot of potential. I feel like a lot of my losses were actually skill issues on my part. But thanks for watching. Fly dangerous.